All right. We are live here in the Reagan's Arcade here in downtown Dickson on Main Street for another episode of the Justin Spurlock Show. And I appreciate all of y'all tuning in. As you can see, to my left here, I've got two great guests. This is the first time I've ever interviewed two people at once, I think, since we started doing this. So I appreciate y'all doing this. This is Stacey Shepard Levine. I always want to call you Stacey Shepard because that's how I first met you. And then Ethan Levine. But thank you both for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. It's our pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Here.
All right. So usually the way we start the show is I usually like to ask you a little bit about your background. So that way if somebody's watching that doesn't know you, that they kind of get an idea of maybe who you are. Maybe they know somebody you're related to or something like that. But I guess we'll go ladies first. And Stacey, tell me just a little bit about like where you grew up and maybe where you went to school and kind of lead me up to where you met this nice fella.
I sure will. Well, I grew up here in Dickson, actually in downtown Dickson, just a few blocks from where we are now. My parents are David and Martha Shepard. They were pharmacists here at Dickson Apothecary. And my grandparents were Mo and Pat Shepard. And I graduated from DCHS in 1998 and went on to UT Knoxville, where I studied architecture. And that is where I met Ethan, actually. The day before classes started, actually Ethan was Willie Spate's roommate,
right.
So kind of all came full circle. Yeah, so that's how we met actually, because he was Willie Spate's roommate, but then he ended up being in all my classes because we had the same major. But we attended UT Knoxville for 5 years together, and then decided to move to Hawaii for 10 years, and that's where we started practicing architecture, got our first jobs, got married, had our first baby, and then decided it was time to move back towards Tennessee, and came back towards home. And we're living back on Main Street, so it's kind of come full circle, and raising our kids here and just loving living the downtown Dickson life. But that's kind of the quick and dirty, but I'll let Ethan chime in.
All right, so Ethan, where did you grow up and kind of where did you come from?
Sure. So I grew up in Central Florida in a little town about the size of Dickson, right between Orlando and Gainesville, called Leesburg, Florida. It's Lake County. So if you fly over it, you mostly see swamps and lakes, not a lot of land. And I went to school in Orlando for high school, graduated from there, and then, as Stacey said, went to UT Knoxville for architecture school. And I met her because of Willie Spate, and then ended up finding out that we had classes together. We did go to school together for 5 years. I must say that it took about 5 years for her to realize I was more than just a classmate. I had other ideas pretty early, but it took a little time, which is fine. Good things take a while.
So did you know Willie?
Not until the first day. So we actually both had signed, I can't remember what it was called anymore, but it was like an early, you come during the summer and it's like a study group hall. So we were on a certain floor. And the idea was that those kids would be kind of a cohort of students. Ended up not working out that way because I was in the architecture program and never came home, basically. So I stayed at the architecture building basically morning, noon, and night. But Stacey was going around visiting her friends from Dickson before classes started, and I was there, and we met because of Willie. He had all of his Led Zeppelin posters hanging up on the wall, and I had my mountain biking and rock climbing posters, and we saw each other occasionally in passing. But we were buddies. It was good.
Well, cool. Well, Willie, if you're watching, hey, I love Willie. Willie's been on my show several times. And
shout out to Willie.
Shout out to Willie.
Right? He knows a lot of history, too, so I just love talking to Willie. That's an interesting connection. I had no idea, but like I told you before, I'm probably gonna find out some things I don't know. Okay, so you guys met in college. Yeah. And you said you moved to Hawaii. So tell me about that, because Hawaii is gorgeous, beautiful. I think everybody wants to eventually visit. I've never had the chance to go there, but you moved there. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was sort of like most things when you're that age, if you're fortunate enough to be able to just kind of do things on a whim, I hadn't planned on a post-college, I interviewed at some places at the time. When was that, 2003? Mm-hmm. Things were pretty slow, at least in our field, so finding a good job was a little bit of a challenge. My brother was actually out there studying for medicine in med school, and I'd visited him for one spring break and was like, well, I guess I could go to Hawaii and be broke there. And then Stacey and I, started dating right before the end of school, and I was like, hey, do you want to go to Hawaii and be broke in Hawaii together?
When you're 23 and,
Exactly.
the world is your oyster.
Right.
No, we drove across the country in his Jeep. We got to California, put his Jeep on the ferry and flew over, and we both stayed with your brother while I found a place to stay, and then we just kind of split the phone book in half, and I looked for architecture firms in A through L, and you looked in M through Z, and we both found jobs within a month.
We were really lucky.
We kind of told our parents that we're just going to go for a year, or more my parents, I guess. I think your mom probably knew that you were going to be gone for a while.
Well, I mean, we like I said, we didn't really have a plan, so it was a whim, and we didn't think it was going to stick for more than a year or two. But I have to say, you mentioned before we started, having met David Shepard, her father, and what a great guy he was. I remember distinctly that conversation because we actually bought our tickets before telling our parents that we were going to do this.
We did.
So I had the pleasure of, explaining to Stacy's parents that I was about to take their daughter, halfway across the world without a plan, and they handled it really well. Got a pretty firm handshake from David, but he trusted us, and it worked out, fortunately.
And we were there for 10 years. Yeah.
Wow, 10 years. Huh?
Yeah.
And then what made you want to come back? Just did you miss it?
Well, and I don't want to speak for Stacy, but we both. I mean, life there was incredible. All the things that people would expect life to be like, it was. A really great place to be young and not really concerned about your future. You can live fast and play hard, and be in the ocean in the morning and be in the mountains in the afternoon, or in the same morning. But we were both, after being there for about, at that point it was about 8 years before we had our daughter. We were starting to make moves professionally, and I think she was fortunate enough to stay at the same practice, the same firm for the whole time, and had a great time, but was ready for a change professionally. I had, through 2008, with a downturn, that company actually shut down, and so I had ended up going out on my own and had my own practice for about a year and a half, which was an amazing experience, and ended up putting me in a better position to come to Nashville. But we were both at a place where, either we needed to really commit to staying forever, or staying a lot longer and getting serious about the next step, or make a change. And so we made that decision. And actually, I guess a detail that you could probably tell about, we did, in the process of deciding to transition back to Hawaii, we actually, she went on a sabbatical. I stopped taking clients, and we actually ended up taking almost a year and traveling. We had a lot of friends. One thing about Hawaii is there's a lot of folks, there's a great local culture and a lot of folks that have grown up there and are generations deep, but there's also a lot of expat types that are there for interesting reasons. They might be a graduate student studying archaeology or marine biologist. So we had a lot of friends through my brother, really, through academia, that were doing really interesting things and ended up had left to do their next thing in some far-flung place in the world. And so we had this inadvertent kind of list of friends that were stationed around the world, some of whom were getting married or had something cool happening. And so we decided we'd saved up some money, and we, at that point, weren't really tied down that we were going to take some time to go travel the world. So maybe you can tell them a little bit about our itinerary.
Well, we bopped around to a wedding in England, a wedding in Peru. We went to Egypt. We went to South America. We went on a mission trip in Belize with my family, which is always an important place to go on missions for my parents. Had a good time. Made it count. But back to your question about leaving Hawaii, I will say, for me, a Dickson girl, a Tennessee girl, I always knew that wasn't my home, and I always wanted to be back home. And as I was growing up, quote unquote, I'm still growing up. But as you're kind of growing into your own as a young adult, and I'm starting to give back to my community and wanting to be involved in things, it kind of dawned on me that I wanted to be giving back to the place that raised me, So I really, really started to just feel my roots pull me back home really strongly. And I also, at the same time, was feeling not disillusioned, but I guess antsy with architecture. Didn't want to be sitting behind the computer anymore. Wanted to be kind of in the community. So I actually went back to graduate school when we got to Tennessee and got a master's degree at Lipscomb in civic leadership. And so since then, I actually have not worked in architecture in probably 6 years, probably. So since we've been back in Tennessee, I've been working with different nonprofits. I worked for the Clement Railroad Museum actually when we first moved back here. Worked on my thesis project here actually surrounding history.
Really?
Created a downtown Dickson historical walking tour, kind of marrying my interest in architecture and history. It's still sort of working. You'll see some like QR code, white and black and blue stickers that say Dash with QR codes on them in some of the buildings downtown. If you scan those, you'll pull up historic photos of the building. You'll see some stories of the buildings. But anyway, that was my
awesome.
thesis project. For my program at Lipscomb, but that's kind of what brought us back here, was just really wanting to be back in the community, and as we set down roots, wanting to root back and give back to Dickson. And
I would say that also I guess more kind of coincidental connections, but when you applied to Lipscomb, I had met an architect who's I'm now partners with, but when we first, we came back for the holidays during Christmas time, and he was ready at the time when Stacey was accepted to Lipscomb. He was ready to hire somebody, so that kind of serendipitously fell together. And at the time, we were living in Nashville, renting a place. But I guess fate and your desire to be back home, and really it made a lot of sense to me too. Led us back to Dickson. I can't imagine really being any happier. It's been awesome, and we were talking a little bit before we started too about some of the things that I'm involved with architecturally, and I can say it's really now that I say this, thinking about it, I think it must be, Stacey's family has done a lot of service work in the community, and Stacey's now kind of doing that professionally and working the public sector. It's really inspired me to want to be part of things that are making a small community better. And so now that we're here, and there's a lot of opportunity. It's a growing town. The people are amazing. And there's just so much potential. So it's really great to be able to be in a place like this and be, part of the community and, getting involved. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about architecture, because I know y'all are in that world, and I love architecture from the point of view, because I like old, historical things. Mm-hmm. And so one of my favorite things to do is just kind of go around and look at old things, and what, many of the old things that survive are these old buildings. A lot of the other stuff gets kind of thrown out, but buildings survive. And so you can see a lot of history in downtown Dickson from just the buildings that are down here, which is one reason why I really want to do the show in a historic building, and we're here in the Reagan's Arcade. So I like architecture. Maybe tell me a little bit about what brought you to the field of architecture. Maybe like why you wanted to get into that, and then maybe tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing. Okay,
sure. So growing up, I always loved art and drawing. Building models. I got I had a phase there where I was doing strictly military models at, I think it was 1/32 scale or something like that, and everything. I was just doing that for about a year and a half. But there was something about the technical side that I was always drawn to. I liked science and math, and so honestly, when it got to the point, I was kind of a late bloomer academically. I was a little bit of a cut up for the good part of my young life. So there was a point where honestly, my dad was kind of, sort of applying some pressure. You really need to get focused, and he said, he sort of pointed out those things that I was naturally drawn to, and said, what do you think about architecture? And one of the things that's unique about architecture, and I guess it's kind of like medicine, you in a way you have to declare pretty early because it's a focus that takes some time. And so when he suggested that, and we started looking at possible schools to go to, and of course, the University of Florida was an option. Sorry guys for saying UF. But I looked there, but I could say after going and visiting a couple of colleges and seeing what those programs looked like, and so many of them, it's a real kind of like, you got this camaraderie and this energy of creative thinking in a place where people are staying up all night and drawing pictures. There's a little bit of writing, a little bit of research, but it's more about making and creating, and thinking kind of abstractly. So Stacey will tell you, there's like, everything's a gray area for me. Like I'm kind of, nothing is literal and it's all sort of abstract. So I was drawn to that. And so after fortunately getting into a couple of schools after applying. University of Tennessee was a great balance of kind of far enough away from home that it felt like I was going to college. I was leaving the state, close enough that I could drive home in a weekend. And I love the outdoors, and so having the Smoky Mountains and everything that Knoxville had to offer was kind of a perfect balance of all those things. So it worked out. I loved it. Loved going to school, and I'm glad that I stayed in the profession. But as it relates to Dickson, I could say that. We were talking about the post office, so I'm involved with the post office restoration. That's something that I remember visiting Dickson for the first time when Stacey and I were first dating, and seeing that building. Like anybody else that has an appreciation for history and architecture, or just history, there's something that, not knowing anything about what the backstory of the building is, you can tell that it's special. And so having seen that, it was always in the back of my mind of something that I would love to somehow be involved with if anything ever happened. It was clear that it had been sitting for a while, so that's a project. I could get into the whole backstory if you're interested in that. But fortunate enough I met the previous owner, got to know her, and was able to help, I guess, facilitate a sale of the building and a buyer that was interested in keeping the building intact and restoring it. And so now I get to be the architect involved with that, so that's really cool.
Well, I think people would probably be interested in it. I know you probably don't know what's going to happen with it, because you never know until it's done.
Right.
But it sounds like it's going to be a really cool place when it eventually comes to.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a place. One of the things that I always felt, and I was working, Michael Shepard, he and I actually, before we found the current owner, he and I were fancying ourselves as maybe the developers. So we were kind of masterminding an idea of how can we find some, get a loan, get some people to invest some money, restore this amazing building and turn it into something great for the community. So we always felt that a building that was always public facing, that was always a place that the public could go to, needed to stay that. It would be a great, residence if someone wanted this really cool, kind of Batman style residence, but it would be private and it wouldn't really be able to be enjoyed by the community in the same way. So the idea of finding a way to restore it and then put something in there that would support, kind of a new life for the building. And so the current owner has similar visions, and so it, will very likely involve food and drink and music and that kind of thing. And we're in the process right now of restoring the building. And so there's some folks might have read that we applied for a grant last year. It's a historic development grant. It's a state-funded grant that's focused really on buildings like that. They're of a certain age. In this case, it's on the National Register of Historic Places, so that put it high on the kind of criteria list. And then also towns of this size that are kind of rural, that are up and coming, that have a lot of potential. And the state's trying to make sure that places like this can continue to be viable economically and still maintain what makes them special. And so, the post office is kind of a perfect example of that. And so we were fortunate enough to be approved for the grant. And so right now we're going through a process of restoration, which should be probably wrapped up, late, probably near the end of the year. And then phase 2 will be the tenant, what we would call tenant improvements, which would be this new operator and something much more interesting, cool.
I think overall, downtown Dickson has really seen a revitalization.
Yeah.
When I was young, it really wasn't as happening as much downtown as it is now. You've always had your mainstays, Hodges, Goalpost, and the Reagans, and Taylor Funeral Home, Fuzzles. All those have always been here, but you've seen all these new businesses come along recently. What's your take on that, sort of from an architectural point of view? Because you've been here long enough to kind of see it advance. What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely in the short time. So what are we now at, about 6 years living back in Dickson? A lot has changed, and I guess this isn't just to be talking about the work I'm involved with, but we were just talking about Chris Gadd and Furnace Brewing. He and I met before we moved back to Dickson. I think we were doing the one of the fun runs. It was the Give and Gobble, and being on the newspaper, he sort of knew everybody was, right? And he kind of introduced himself. Hey, I'm into brewing. I'm looking at doing a place, opening a place, and we started, on the weekends when we would come visit her parents, we would drive around and look at places to lease or buy for him. Long story short, that became, being involved with the design for Furnace Brewing. So that was kind of my first, direct connection with a new business opening downtown, and really, seeing an operator or an owner that really had a vision and believed in what could happen on Main Street or happen downtown, and believed in the people, that people really wanted something new. And then, since that time, there have been, at least half a dozen new businesses that have opened that are doing, as far as I know, doing great. We definitely visit them. We help support them as much as we can.
Absolutely.
So it's cool to be able to working for an architecture firm that's in Nashville, in a city that is like one of the it cities in the world at this point.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be, and being fortunate enough to work on some of those higher profile projects, it's amazing, but it's kind of dizzying, and the scale of things can be a little bit hard to wrap your head around. I mean, you can turn around a corner and there's a new high rise that you didn't see literally in a few weeks before, or at least the beginning of a high rise, and so. It's not I don't think it's an ego thing as much as really wanting to tangibly be part of something that you can really help be part of change. And so being in Dickson and being able to be part of these projects that are right downtown and really anywhere in Dickson, it's and watching other folks be involved and do things, it's just really inspiring. And it's like a tangible change that you can see in a short period of time. You can see it on people's faces. We did the Dickson pillow fights this past weekend. That's a whole other story.
That was fun, wasn't it?
It was really fun.
We can take just a second to talk about it, because I would really like to see that blow up and be a lot bigger next year.
Oh, I think it will.
Because it was fun, wasn't it?
It was so fun. Ethan and I are both big losers, though. We both got knocked out in round one. We didn't have to fight each other, thank goodness. But during my fight, I just couldn't stop laughing. It was just so ridiculously ridiculous, but it's so funny. But I think it was such a great day. Everybody was joyful and having a great time. The weather was actually perfect. It rained in the morning, but was not too hot. Just it's super funny to watch people that get up and just flop around and get pummeled and fall in the water. And I think people who didn't participate maybe felt a little like FOMO maybe, and are going to participate next year, right?
I agree. I think and we didn't we did not sign up and do it, but I definitely will, because I didn't know really what to expect either. Right. I did pull out the phone and live streamed a little bit of it just so folks would get an idea, because I had no idea what to expect. When they said pillow fight, I just imagined them giving people pillows and just running around in a circle.
Right.
But they got like a pool, and it was just cool. And I actually got on YouTube, I'm not going to lie, and looked up some more.
Get some strategy.
Yeah, I was like, how did this work? Why are those guys wearing jeans? What's going on here?
Jeans are the key. I think jeans are the key.
I think we figured something out that day, and I think a couple of fellas knew some secrets before they got there. But it was a ton of fun, and it raised a lot of money for a lot of great causes. And I'd like to see more of that happen in downtown Dickson.
It was just a good day, because it was all about raising money for a good cause. Allison Avalon and Heal Humanity and all the good things she does with fighting human trafficking, which is just such a scary concept, and I'm sure I'm naive with how awful it even really is, So thankful that there are people like her in our community that are doing the work that she's doing.
Yep. Absolutely.
And all that, just I guess to bring it back to your original question, all that happened in front of Mulberry Mill, which when we moved to Dickson had yet to be, I think at that point it was not.
I think it was just being renovated.
It had just been purchased.
Yeah.
So, lots happened there in a short period of time, and that's a whole other kind of node right off of Main Street. So it's neat to see, from an architectural and I guess urban design perspective, these kind of there's Main Street, and then there's all these little areas that are just a block or two off where things are happening, and it starts to create, a real, like a district, I guess it would be the term,
It's really downtown Dickson has gotten really cool in the last few years, and I think it's just going to even keep getting better and better.
Yeah.
Because there's still, you've seen a lot of places develop, but there's still some places that we could, build up and add to the downtown scene, and I just don't see it slowing down anytime soon. I hope not, but you never know.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
All right, so let me kind of switch the conversation a little bit, because I want to tell you a little story that I started to tell you when you first got here. So most people who are probably watching know that I do some work with WDKN, and actually I got my start interviewing when I was 16 years old. I was actually a student over at Dickson County High School, and I wanted to be on the radio. Like when I was in high school, I wanted to be like a sports talk analyst. That was my thing. And so I was just like, I knew we had a radio station downtown, and I just happened to know the right people to be able to kind of get my foot in the door. And so I'm 16 years old, just started driving, very first job, and they let me work at the radio station. And basically all I did, I don't want it to sound more glamorous than it is, I showed up, I unlocked the doors for Warren Medley, and I hit all the buttons for him. And I just basically just kind of got to watch. But it was a really amazing experience, because Warren would have all these World War II veterans come on, so I got to hear their stories. And actually, I got to do my very first interview it was probably, I guess, close to a year after I started. It was in the year 2000, and it was actually your dad that I got to interview. So I'd been bothering Warren Medley a lot, saying, I want to interview somebody. Let me get on that microphone, And he's just
ready.
Like, okay, whatever, Justin, And so then when the political season rolled around and we started getting a lot of interviews with people like that, I said, hey, maybe one of these candidates will let me ask him a question. And so a couple came in, and one guy was actually not very nice to me, and I won't mention him, but he did not want to be interviewed by a kid. But when David Shepard got there, Warren was like, Justin wants to ask you a question. He was like, Justin wants to ask me a question? He was like, all right, cool. Well, when the time comes, Justin, I'm going to let you ask me a question. And I talked a big game, but then I got kind of nervous because I'm sitting here talking to David Shepard, who's running for the State House of Representatives. And but anyways, I don't even remember the question I asked him. It was some basic question like, what are you going to do when you get up there? But he was just so cool about it. He took my basic question and turned it into this big thing, and it made it sound like I was doing something. And I felt real good about it. And I remember leaving that day thinking, maybe I can interview people. And here I am 20 years later, and I'm still doing it. But he was the first person I ever got to interview. And I've told that story a few times, but I've never told you. But it meant a lot to me. He was a really good guy. And maybe if you don't mind us talking just a little bit about him, because he recently had an honor, the senior center over here. The city council got together with the mayor, and you guys decided to name that building after him. And I think everybody unanimously said that was the right thing to do. But maybe just real quickly talk about what it was like, growing up with him, because you ended up kind of following in his footsteps, and we'll talk more about that in a minute as far as being a public servant. But what was it like, growing up with David? Because I always thought he was a great guy.
He was a great guy. He was just so fun and happy-go-lucky and didn't take anything too seriously. Worked hard, growing up, he was never home for dinner. He was always at work or at city council, but such a great dad. Well, both my parents worked super hard. They ran their own business and had 3 kids. So, what are you going to do? But just a great role model for just not judging anyone, being a friend to everyone, and learning to get along with everyone, and just we're all in this together kind of thing. But he definitely was a role model to me. I saw him as a civil servant. When I was in elementary school, he was on the city council and he was vice mayor. And I remember that, thinking, I knew that, and I knew that I was proud of that. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that he was off doing those things. And so, I knew that he wasn't home, but he was off doing important things. So when I did decide to run for city council, it was one of those things where I told myself, this is something I want to do eventually. We have 3 young children, our youngest, who's now 5, but when I knew I wanted to run for city council, he was much younger, and I told myself, okay, I'm gonna wait until our youngest is in school. That would be the best time. I'll just wait until our kids are in school, and then I'll think about running for public office. But at the same time, my dad had recently passed, and I thought to myself, gosh, Dad was he was in his 30s when he first ran. A man never thinks that way. That's really what I thought. He that never crossed his mind. Not but just like men don't think that way. So why am I thinking that way? And so I thought, what, I'm ready now. I'm not gonna make that be my ultimatum. So I'm gonna run now. So I did. 2 years ago, I ran for city council, and I absolutely love it. It is such a cool experience. I learn something new every day. And I have so much more to learn. I'll never stop learning, but everyone on the council is incredible and works so hard. The city, everyone at the city works so hard. We just have incredible city department heads, and just everybody in city government here in Dickson, I think is incredible. So I'm honored to be a part of it.
Well, and if you don't mind, I want to I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, so I apologize, but there's an election that's about to come up. Mm-hmm. And I had forgot kind of how the city works.
Yes.
And so I just assumed all of y'all were up for re-election.
Yes, it is so confusing.
I got to looking at it a few days ago, and I was like, no, it's only a few of them. Do you mind explaining kind of how that works? Because I bet if I'm confused about it, and I'm a government teacher, then there's probably a whole bunch of people.
It is so confusing. In the City of Dickson, there are 8 council members. And so there are 4 wards, and each ward has 2 council members apiece. Each council member is on a 4-year term, but we're all kind of rotating. So every 2 years, 4 of them are up for re-election. So I ran 2 years ago, so I don't have to run for 2 more years, thankfully. My co-council member, Horace Perkins, who is also a Ward 3 council member, we represent Ward 3 together. He's up for election this time. So every 2 years, the council will change over. But thankfully, we don't all have to run every 2 years. So this year, 4 seats are up for re-election, as well as the mayor's seat. 2 of those seats are unopposed, and then 2 have opponents. So Ward 1, who is Betty Lou Alsabrooks, Brett Reynolds is opposing her. And then in Ward 3, Horace Perkins, Clayton Ellis is opposing him. And then there's no one opposing Mayor Weiss this time.
Well, Mayor Weiss, he's been in there for quite a while.
I know, but he just does such a good job. We are, the city is in incredible financial shape. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just... even though we just, built this huge, new, amazing splash pad, and we've done all these, we have so many projects in the works, we're still in really good financial shape, which is just unheard of, kind of, in a lot of municipalities of our size right now. So I feel really good about where we are and some of the projects we have planned.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's where I was going to go next, with some of the cool stuff that, because really... I think the city is doing a great job. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be people who criticize everything, but I think that the city is doing a real good job, especially for the youth, because it seems like we've really kind of made that a priority lately with some of the stuff that we've, that the city's been doing. Mm-hmm. And I'll let you talk a little bit about it, but you've got the skate park, which is right here in downtown. We've got the splash pad, and then... there's some talk about maybe doing some other things, but I'll let you kind of talk about the ones we've already done first.
Well, we definitely are looking into building, a new pool, a new aquatic facility. Yeah. And that's something that is just taking some time, just like everything takes time. With Buckner Pool, unfortunately, the state health codes didn't pass us this year, so we couldn't open Buckner Pool, and also we couldn't get enough lifeguards to open the pool. We generally need about 30 lifeguards a year to run it at a full schedule, and we only got 6. And so the hope is if we can build a year-round facility, an indoor aquatic facility, and we can employ people year-round as lifeguards, that will retain and be able to employ more, the correct amount of lifeguards, and we'll be able to have a year-round facility. Mm-hmm. Ethan grew up in Florida. He was a swimmer. That was always his sport. And we know there are a lot of kids that aren't into ball sports. It's important to have, swimming is a life safety skill, it's really important to me personally to have a pool. And so that is something that I'm pushing for sure. I'm also on the Parks Board. And so I get to be a part of those conversations. But no, the city is looking at, how do we build a pool that we can afford and that's going to meet everyone's needs. But we also just, built the new senior center. So most cities, of our size or even bigger, do not have a senior facility of the caliber that we have. And, when you get to a certain age, loneliness and relationships are one of the kind of biggest issues, and so it's so important to have a place to go, for people to have a place to go and to fellowship and to have meals. And I'm just really proud that our senior center is so active, and Miss Joan does an awesome job over there. And you can start going when you're age 55 and up, and actually that's not too far off for us, so looking forward to that. So no, we've done something for the youth, but also for seniors, but then also we're always looking at the infrastructure, and that's something that's also super important to me, coming from an architecture background and knowing about transportation and roads and sewer systems and stormwater. We just had this huge rain an hour ago before we're filming this, and taking care of our current infrastructure is really important to me, especially as we grow and add more homes and more load on our wastewater and stormwater and all that. So just making sure everything continues to run like it should. You shouldn't have to think about these things, as an everyday citizen, but also providing the things that make a good life.
Well, and like you said, we're taking care of the old and we're taking care of the young, which I think I think we could all agree that you got to take care of your most vulnerable populations, which are your young and your old. And I think it's great, all the things that have taken place here lately. What kind of feedback have you gotten on the splash pad? Because I've heard nothing but good. I mean, people were frustrated that it opened a little late. We all understand why. There was some problems with the water lines and stuff like that. And you want to make sure it's going to last forever, so you got to do it the right way. But what kind of feedback have you got? Because I loved it.
I mean, it's been mostly great. And when I go through and I read I admit, I go through and read all the comments on social media posts, and when you see some of the negative comments, those people don't live here. It's so funny to me. Like, I'll go and look and be like, you live in Clarksville, like what? So I don't know. I think the people that that really matter are the people that live here, and the people that live here all know that good things sometimes take time, and we want to take good care of it. That's why these rules are in place. They've had to recently kind of revamp some of the rules and change some of the hours so that they can keep it maintained. But the fact that it's one of the biggest in the nation right now, I think. I'll have to ask Sherry Wilson for sure.
I think that's what I heard.
Yeah.
At least in the state,
and
I know.
It's gorgeous. If you haven't been there, it's stunning. When you walk down there, it's just incredible. And it's being enjoyed by all ages. Our 11-year-old, we took her for the first time. For the first hour, she was a little bit too cool, standing around a little bit too cool. And then she was right in there with everybody else. So, it's enjoyed by all ages. But it's been mostly great, and it's going to be growing pains as they figure things out, and I'm sure the rules will change even more. And for instance, right now you can't reserve the pavilion, but probably in the future you'll be able to do that. So there'll be rules in place for that. But everybody's been loving it, and there's not enough parking right now, but there's parking being built, right? And so I think most of the complaints are just coming from a place that they don't have all the information yet, and they don't know that parking's being built. Just wait, hold your horses, it's coming, things like that.
Well, we've been talking for about 40 minutes, and so we'll probably try to wrap it up here pretty soon. I got just a couple more questions, and I guess this next one, we've talked about the past, right? But I want to kind of look towards the future, and with both of y'all being so civic minded and architects and things like that, what do you think Dickson needs next? I know that's kind of a put you on the spot question, but we've done, like we said, for the kids recently, several parks. The senior center's looking pretty good. What do you think we ought to do next? What else do you think Dickson might need? You can go for either one of you.
Yeah, I'll take an opportunity here to plug an organization called the Dickson Arts Council, which I'm on the board of as of recently. So some folks might be familiar with the Renaissance Players, the community theater, and their home was over at the Renaissance Center. And since that transition happened, they were kind of displaced and looking for a new place to go. And so out of that kind of change, they've developed this vision that an arts center downtown would be an incredible way to not only provide them a home, but also create something that's, again, more of a civic focused community hub type space. And so I think I can share some of these details, but they're talking to the city and county about kind of a partnership, a public-private partnership, where they, as a nonprofit, will hopefully be able to use some publicly owned land to develop a project. And so that facility would be a black box theater. It would have studio spaces that would be for dance and could be rented for special events, outdoor space, potentially space large enough that could maybe even work as a farmer's market type of space, or an outdoor theater, or a amphitheater type space. And the goal really is to ideally have that located downtown. So when we talk about, as you were saying, things that Dickson as a city is doing to make sure that everybody's accounted for, and that it's, to me, I would call it livability. It's what it is it makes keeps people here and that will bring people here, and the kinds of people that you'd want to have living in Dickson, which is anybody that loves the place, right? So something like an arts center where there's theater happening, if you imagine like, a 24-hour cycle of a town like Dickson, especially, in downtown, someone might come into Dickson on a Friday evening to see a show. They might go to dinner beforehand. They might come early and shop, then go to dinner, go to a show, have ice cream after, maybe have a nightcap, or go to have a drink, or they might stay in a Airbnb. So in a way, it's sort of part of this economic ecosystem that can happen in a town like this. And it's just one more thing if you're somebody who's looking for a great place to live, and you're from somewhere else, you might be looking for a splash pad, senior center, an arts center, so I think that's really exciting for me. Something that for the future of Dickson could be really great.
Good answer.
I agree. I agree with that 100%. And it's funny that you say that because I was just talking to somebody about this last week that was involved with the Renaissance players, and they said, what we really need is some kind of an auditorium to continue doing stuff like that. And then when you start thinking about the auditoriums that we have, we're fortunate. We have a few. The Dickson Middle School, I think, has the biggest one.
Yep.
And then, Dickson County High School has a smaller one. But besides that, there's just not really a place for performances.
Right.
And I thought a lot about that. The other one that keeps getting brought up is the pool, but, we know we're working on that, and we've already but that's cool to hear that they're thinking about doing something like that, because I think that might be the most needed thing is some kind of an art center.
Yeah. And I think it would be important to be downtown too, because then kids could walk from the middle school, and it's easy to get to from that high school. It's not as easy to get to from the outer schools, but just to be an anchor for downtown and to add more to the vibrancy of downtown. I think that's important. But for me, I think I'm an architect, by training, and so I am pro-development in a sense, but I also love Dickson the way it is, and also in a sense, and don't want to see it grow too much. But I know growth is inevitable. But I do want to see, as Dickson grows, I want to see smart growth, which is one of the reasons that I was interested in being on the council. I want to make sure that as we grow, that we're thinking carefully about every impact that our development has on our community. I would love to see more walkability. I would love to see more sidewalks and more pedestrian walkways across the bypass and things like that, because our bypass cuts off our city. I think that's really it. Most everything else I love about Dickson. I think we're on the right path, and I just know it's growing pains, but we're getting there.
It is definitely a great place to live, and we kind of talked about this before we started recording, but I think even when you move off and you go somewhere else, you almost appreciate it more, I think, and it causes you to want to come back, and I think that's happened to a lot of us. And so I think we've got a great place to live, and hopefully we can keep it that way. Here's the last thing I want to ask you. Just because I'm very civic-minded, I really want people to be more involved in their community, more involved in the government. As a city council person, if somebody's watching and they're just not really involved, but they would like to get more involved, how could they go about doing that? I know they maybe can contact their maybe check out which ward they're in, contact their city council person. Are they allowed to go to the meetings? What would be the best way for somebody to get involved in that?
I absolutely encourage you to attend your city council and county commission meetings. I think they're really interesting. The agenda and the schedules are all on the websites, the city website and the county website. I personally get super thrilled when I can see that community members are in the audience, because a lot of the times, it feels like we're just talking to each other in the chambers. And so I just think it's really important to come and attend and see what goes on and understand, the kind of conversations and debate that happens. And then you'll kind of probably naturally have more questions and then follow up with your council person. But absolutely, if you have a question about something or a complaint or a concern, please contact your representative, whether it's in the county or the city, because that's what they're there for. 100%. Please.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Justin.
You know, it takes time out of your day and away from your family to come and do stuff like this.
We're happy to leave our children at home. They've been fighting all day. So.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you for this.
I'll invite you back again then, if that's the case. Thank you again, though. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I think this was a lot of fun for those of you that are watching to interview a couple. I think I might have to do some more of this. This was a pretty good idea. Was not my idea, but it was a very good idea. So we'll probably do it again in the future. So thank you to everybody for listening. We'll be back with another episode soon. And, of course, thank you both for coming.
Thank you.
The Justin Spurlock Show. We'll see you next time.